Alright, today in class, while working with your groups, you learned about factoring a greatest common factor, also known as the GCF, factoring by grouping, and factoring trinomials. And all of the trinomials had a leading coefficient of 1. So we're going to look later where the leading coefficient is not 1, some other number. But for today, just the leading coefficient of 1. So let's review. I just want to go over a couple of things, make sure that we got this. So on that worksheet, number 3, it asked you to factor out the greatest common factor. So hopefully you looked at these 3 terms, 1, 2, 3, and you thought about what do they have in common. We'll first look at the coefficients. What's the greatest common factor of 15, 25, and 35? Well, it's 5. What's the greatest common factor of x cubed, x to the 5th, and x squared? So what's the biggest thing that they all have in common? An x squared. What's left goes inside the parentheses. So 5x squared times this is going to give me 5x cubed. So 5x squared times 3x. 5x squared times this is going to give me 25x to the 5th. So that's 5x cubed. And then 5x squared times this is going to give me negative 35x squared. Well, that's just a negative 7. I can check it by distributing to see if I got the right answer. And I did. Okay, let's try this one. Factor the GCF. So first, what do the coefficients have in common for these 3 terms? Well, they all have a 3. What about the x term? Or what about the x variable? This one has an x cubed, this has an x squared, and this has x to the 4th. So what's the largest that's in common? X squared. And then looking at the y's, it has a y squared, y cubed. So what's the largest that they all have in common? A y squared. Now what's left? 3x squared y squared times this is going to give me 3x cubed y squared. Well, the only thing missing, the only thing I need to multiply by is x. And then 3x squared y squared times this middle term is going to give me negative 6x squared y squared. Well, that's just a negative 2. And then 3x squared y squared times this is going to give me 12x to the 4th y cubed. So that's 4x squared y. And I'm done. Easy. Alright, what about factoring by grouping? So this is number 5 from your packet. So to factor by grouping, you want to look at 2 terms at a time. So what do these 2 terms have in common? What's their greatest common factor? Well, it's a 2x. Left over is x minus 3. Then what do these 2 things have in common? A positive 5, y. What's left? X minus 3. So I did that. Now I can look at the greatest common factor, because this is 1 term and this is 1 term. So now I have a binomial. I have a binomial here that has a greatest common factor. The greatest common factor is x minus 3. So then I'm thinking, what do I have to multiply x minus 3 by to get 2x times x minus 3? Well, I have to multiply it by 2x. And then what do I have to multiply x minus 3 by to get 5y times x minus 3? Well, that's a 5y. So this 4-term polynomial became factored as a binomial times a binomial. So a hint, if you're factoring by grouping, is there's always going to be 4 terms. So if you have something that has 4 terms, like this, you might be factoring by grouping. You should always look and see if there's a greatest common factor first. In this case, there wasn't, and it told you that in the directions. What about 6C? So first, is there a greatest common factor? Is there something that all of these have in common? No, I can see straight away the y squared and the 16 have nothing in common. So there's not going to be a greatest common factor. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I can factor by grouping. So I'm going to look at the first two terms, and then I'm going to look at the last two terms and see what do these have in common. What's the greatest common factor of y squared plus 8xy? That's just y. What's left is y plus 8x. The last two terms have a 2 in common. What's left? Y plus 8. I think I'm missing something. Yep, I was missing an x on the end here. Okay, so it's y plus 8x. So now I'm looking again. I just have a binomial. Here's one term, here's the second term. So now what do these two have in common? Well, they both have a y plus 8x. What's left? Y plus 2. I have to take y plus 8x times y to get this first term. Then I have to take y plus 8x times 2 to get this second term. So that's it. That's factored form. Now let's look at some trinomials. So we already know how to multiply these, right? Multiply, multiply. So x squared minus 3x plus 2x minus 6. We know how to multiply these. Now we're going to go backwards though. If I give you this trinomial, can you tell me what the two factors are? So we're looking for what's the relationship between x plus 2, x minus 3, and the numbers, the final coefficients of x squared minus x minus 6. Well, hopefully you're realizing that I have to multiply x times x, and I get the coefficient of the x squared. So it's the firsts that are giving me the coefficient of the x squared. Then I have to multiply x times the negative 3 to get this one, and the 2 times the x to get this one. Since the coefficient of the x's, so right here is 1, and this one is 1, all that I'm looking at is the two numbers here. So what happens with the 2 and the negative 3? What happens here to get this coefficient, the linear term coefficient? I have to add them. So these two added give you the coefficient of the linear term, which remember is the x term. What about this last number? How do I get this negative 6? Well, that comes from positive 2 times the negative 3. So that means I need to multiply them. So multiplied gives you the coefficient of the constant term. Or you could say just the constant term. So this is with no variable. Okay, so let's try this. If I have x squared plus 10x minus 24, this is going to factor as a binomial. So I'm thinking to get that x squared, I have to multiply x times x. Then to get these numbers, I need to look at them multiplied equals negative 24. Right? From up here we knew that when I multiply them, multiplied gives you the constant term. So the constant term here is negative 24. So what things multiply to give you negative 24? Well, that's negative 1, 24, or positive 1, negative 24. Maybe it's negative 2, positive 10, or positive 2, negative 10. I'm sorry, 12. 12. Maybe it's negative 3, positive 8, or positive 3, negative 8. Or maybe it's negative 4, positive 6, or positive 4, negative 6. So those are the things that multiply to give me negative 24. And they also have to add to give you the coefficient of the linear term. So the linear term is positive 10. So I'm thinking which of this list adds to give me positive 10? So I go through the list. Negative 1 plus 24? Nope. 1 plus negative 24? Nope. Negative 2 plus 12? That's a winner. So that becomes negative 2 plus 12. To check it, I could multiply these. So x minus 2 times x plus 12. Or you can have Wolfram Alpha multiply it for you. X squared plus 12x minus 2x minus 24. X squared plus 10x minus 24. Got it. Okay, let's try another one. So I need to multiply to this one, add to this one. So I'm going to look at when they multiply to negative 18. What things multiply to negative 18? 2, 9, negative 2, 9, 3 and 6, 3 and negative 6. That's it. So what things add up to negative 7? Not 1 plus negative 18, not negative 1 plus 18. 2 and negative 9? There it is. So this becomes a binomial. To get x squared, I've got to have x times x. To get the negative 7x and the negative 18, I've got to have a positive 2 and a negative 9. And I can check it. X plus 2, x minus 9. Multiply, multiply. Done. I got the right answer. Okay, so now I want you to try these two. So pause the video, do these on a piece of paper, and bring them to class with you. Alright, hopefully that was enough time for you to take care of those two problems. Now let's talk about what if I want to do two ways of factoring at once. You should always, always, always start with the GCF. Can I factor using a greatest common factor? So let's answer that. Is there a greatest common factor for this problem? Yeah, it's 3. So when I factor out a 3, I'm left with this. Now I have to factor a trinomial. So I'm thinking what things multiply to give me 8. 1, 8, 2, 4. Right? And then I could do negatives too. Negative 1, negative 8, negative 2, negative 4. What things add to, multiply to 8 and add up to negative 6? Well, that's right here. So this becomes x minus 4, x minus 2. I'm done. What about this problem? Is there a greatest common factor? Yeah, it's 2x. What's left? X squared minus x minus 30. So what things multiply to give me negative 30? Negative 1, 30, negative 2, 15, negative 3, 10, negative 5, 6. And I can do the reverse as well. 1, negative 30, 2, negative 15, 3, negative 10, 5, negative 6. Eventually, you'll be able to guess these pretty well.